Now, just before Easter, I caught up with John as we do each episode. This time we talked about GRDC's move to consolidate Australia's various cereals collections into one centre at Horsham in Victoria. John, thanks once again for joining us on Groundcover TV. Now, you've just announced a significant development in terms of pre-breeding and genetic resources. Tell me about that.
We've just finalised an investment to bring together into Australia one national genetic resource centre for crops based down in Horsham, and I think that's a real milestone. I guess most people know that none of the crops we grow in here in Australia commercially are native to Australia. Their origins are from other parts of the world, so we are very dependent in our crop breeding programs to make sure that we've got good genetic resources here in Australia. And the investment we're making in Victoria with the Victorian Government, I think, is absolutely essential for our crop breeders to have access to genetic diversity.
We've had genetic resources around the place before, for instance the cereals collection in Tamworth. What's significant about having them centralised?
Well, I guess what we've been moving towards is to try and rationalise the collection. So there has been a number of collections held in Australia, but also make them more accessible. With computer technologies and databases, that's actually a lot easier. And we're also trying to connect it up with what's happening in other parts of the world so that we can also access material that's not necessarily in Australia at the moment.
It's been described as groundbreaking and a first for Australia.
Well, it is, and it's because it's so important to Australian grain growers to have access to that genetic diversity and for breeders to have access to that. And I guess it's really the only one activity in the chain of activities that go to breeding a new crop. But part of it is actually going overseas, going back to the places where the crops originated and looking for wild types and material that we can now use in our breeding programs to build in, for example, frost resistance or water use efficiency into our modern crops.
Why is a centralised facility likely to make plant breeding and pre-breeding more productive?
It will make it more productive, and it's also consistent with our whole national grains industry RD&E strategy, where we're saying, look, we want every dollar to be working hard for Australian grain growers. We can't afford duplication, fragmentation. If you go back, we used to have 4, I think 5 genetic resource centres in Australia. They're all small, they all didn't have the critical mass they needed to do a good job. Bringing it together into Horsham, into the one location, gives you that critical mass, allows us to really do it properly, and I think that's important for Australian grain growers.
Interesting that while it's a significant investment, it's in an area that growers don't really get to see firsthand, isn't it?
Well, it's seen by growers in the varieties that the breeders breed for them, so they probably don't know about it directly, but in the background it's incredibly important. It's the absolute, that's the engine room, is that genetic diversity that breeders then harvest.
Moving on, let's look ahead to the season. You'd have to be pretty encouraged about the outlook for this year, wouldn't you?
Well, in a physical sense, in a production sense, yes. When you look at the eastern seaboard, the phenomenal rain that we've experienced over the last few months means that most of, if not all of the grains belt's got a good full profile of moisture ready to go, and all it's really waiting for is a good planting opportunity, provided growers have had opportunities to also control their weeds, which has been a huge challenge. It's on the back of a record crop. So last year we grew over 29 million tonnes of wheat, and West Australia grew 15 million tonnes of wheat in West Australia alone. So the production side is looking good. The more challenging aspect is prices, and I guess the very high Australian dollar at the moment is not good for growers, and that is making it difficult. But in addition to that, at the moment we have reasonably high wheat stocks in the world, and that's also putting downward pressure on prices. So the price outlook, I think, is not as nice as what we would like. I guess the other things outlook-wise is expectations with canola prices being good, that quite a few growers will increase the amount of canola in their rotation. And also with livestock prices being good, particularly lambs, that we might actually see some growers actually put less acres into crop and a bit more into livestock.
Big wheat stocks and the high dollar, but on the other hand there's supply pressure from maize.
Yeah, look, at the moment the US has had 2 record maize crops and still stocks have declined, and I guess a lot of that's around the fact that 40% of the maize is now going into ethanol in the States. And that certainly is underpinning the wheat price, because obviously at a certain point in time livestock industries start substituting wheat for maize.
John Harvey, good to talk to you once again.
It's a pleasure.